Why did philosophy begin in ancient Greece and not in Egypt, Mesopotamia, China, or India, civilizations that were older and in many ways more advanced? Why did a scattered network of city-states, perched on the rocky edges of the Aegean, give birth to a discipline that would define the way humanity asks questions about truth, justice, and existence? And what does that tell us about the kind of world that allows questioning itself to survive? Before Greece, wisdom already existed. Egypt built monumental architecture guided by cosmic order. Mesopotamia recorded laws and mapped the heavens. India and China cultivated moral, metaphysical, and spiritual systems of immense sophistication. Humanity was never short of knowledge or reflection. What Greece introduced was not intelligence, but a new form of intellectual courage, the idea that truth could be pursued through reason, argument, and observation, rather than accepted through authority or tradition. Philosophy didn't arise because the Greeks were smarter. It arose because their world made questioning possible. Geography was destiny. Greece's rugged mountains divided its people into small, independent city-states, or poleis. Unlike the centralized empires of Egypt or Persia, no single ruler could dominate the Greek world for long. This fragmentation fostered competition, political, cultural, and intellectual. Each city-state became an experiment in governance and values. Sparta built its society on discipline and order. Athens on democracy and debate. When neighboring communities lived under different systems, it became impossible to believe that one way of life was self-evidently natural. People began to ask, what is justice? What is the best way to live? What makes a society good? In this tension between difference and proximity, philosophy found its first home. If mountains divided Greece, the sea connected it. With its jagged coastline and countless islands, Greece was a civilization built on trade. Greek sailors and merchants reached Egypt, Phoenicia, Persia, and beyond, absorbing ideas about astronomy, mathematics, writing, and medicine. But the Greeks did something distinctive with what they borrowed. They universalized it. They began to ask not only how something worked, but why it worked. They transformed practical knowledge into theoretical inquiry. Trade didn't just move goods, it moved perspectives. It exposed Greek thinkers to foreign gods, customs, and explanations of the world. And this encounter with difference gave birth to comparison. If there were many ways to live, worship, and explain nature, then truth could not simply be inherited. It had to be examined. Intellectual friction produced heat, and from that heat came the spark of philosophy. Writing turned that spark into flame. The Greeks adopted the Phoenician alphabet and made it simpler, phonetic, and accessible. Unlike the complex cuneiform or hieroglyphic systems, the Greek alphabet could be learned by ordinary citizens. Writing allowed ideas to escape the boundaries of memory and authority. When thoughts are written down, they can be debated, critiqued, and preserved. Text made argument possible. It turned belief into statement, statement into proposition, and proposition into something that could be tested. For the first time, knowledge was not simply passed down, it could be challenged. This was the birth of logos reasoned explanation. A written culture encourages what we might call reflective distance, the ability to step outside one's own thoughts and analyze them. The alphabet made thought portable, and once ideas could travel, they could evolve. In Greece, thought became a public act. The written word, like the spoken debate, could belong to everyone willing to engage with it. Politics amplified this habit of reason. The polis was not just a political unit. It was a theater of argument. In democratic Athens, citizens had to persuade one another in the assembly and the courts. Persuasion replaced command as the language of power. To speak well became a civic duty. And to persuade, one had to appeal not to divine will, but to shared reason. In a democracy, words must convince, not compel. The habit of defending an idea before peers taught Greeks that opinions must rest on reasons. In this way, philosophy grew out of civic necessity. A society that debates must learn how to think. Greek religion also played a paradoxical role. It was everywhere, yet it lacked a single sacred text or centralized priesthood. Its gods were human-like, passionate, flawed, often contradictory. Myths differed from city to city and poet to poet. This looseness created space for speculation. When Thales claimed that all things come from water, he was not blaspheming against a holy book. He was offering a natural explanation where once only myth had spoken. The divine remained, but nature became thinkable in its own right. Philosophy began as a whisper in the gap between faith and curiosity. This is the great shift from mythos to logos. Myth explains the world through story, through divine battles, genealogies, or cosmic drama. Logos explains through structure, through cause and principle. Myth says, the world is as it is because the gods made it so. Logos says, the world is as it is because something makes it necessary to be so. Myth comforts. Logos questions, and in that questioning, philosophy found its pulse. The pre-Socratic thinkers Thales, Anaximander, Heraclitus, Parmenides stood at the threshold of this transformation. They sought the underlying substance or principle behind the diversity of the world. Was everything water, as Thales believed? Was the ultimate reality boundless, as Anaximander thought? Was change the only constant, as Heraclitus claimed, or was all change an illusion, as Parmenides argued? These were not theological debates. They were metaphysical explorations, attempts to understand what is, rather than merely what appears. For the first time, the universe was treated as something intelligible, not through revelation, but through reason. But Greece was not alone in thinking deeply. Egypt pondered justice and order. India explored consciousness and liberation. China debated morality and governance. Mesopotamia questioned fate and divine justice. Each civilization produced profound philosophical reflection. The difference was not in intelligence, but in social structure. In Greece, thought became public, argumentative, and self-correcting. Competing schools arose, Pythagoreans, sophists, atomists, each proposing and defending their view. Philosophy became a discipline, a conversation with rules, methods, and expectations. Elsewhere, knowledge often remained tied to priesthoods, empires, or sacred traditions. Wisdom served stability. In Greece, fragmentation and freedom created space for dissent. There was no single empire to silence heterodoxy for long. Ideas could migrate from one city to another, surviving by movement. The Greeks made disagreement into an art. To contradict was not to destroy, but to clarify. The friction of minds became the method of truth. By the time of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, philosophy had matured into self-awareness. It was no longer only about nature, but about ethics, politics, and knowledge itself. Socrates turned the method inward, asking not what the world is made of, but how one should live. Plato sought eternal forms, the unchanging truths behind appearances. Aristotle systematized logic, observation, and classification, laying foundations for both science and ethics. Together, they transformed philosophy from curiosity into a permanent human pursuit. But why does this still matter? Because philosophy is not a relic of Greece. It is a condition of freedom. It is what happens when people refuse to let power define truth. The Greeks remind us that reasoned debate is a fragile achievement, one that depends on the spaces we create for questioning. Philosophy was not born of certainty, but of tension, between myth and reason, tradition and curiosity, authority and dialogue. Philosophy asks us to live as if our minds belong to all of humanity, not just to the tribe or the temple. It teaches that truth is not given, it is pursued. And that pursuit depends on culture, not just intellect. When a society silences doubt, philosophy withers. When it rewards inquiry, philosophy blooms. The world that gave birth to philosophy was imperfect. Greek democracy excluded women, slaves, and foreigners. Its thinkers disagreed constantly. But that imperfection was fertile. It meant nothing was beyond question, not even the gods, not even justice, not even the nature of reality itself. Out of that relentless questioning came the foundations of science, ethics, and political theory, the idea that explanation must be earned, not inherited. So when we say that philosophy was born in Greece, we do not mean it was invented there, as if wisdom elsewhere were absent. We mean that in Greece, for the first time, thinking became a public vocation. It stepped out of the temple and into the marketplace. It ceased to whisper and began to argue aloud. Philosophy begins wherever a mind refuses to accept the first story it is told. It begins whenever someone looks at the world and wonders, not just what is true, but why it should be believed. Ancient Greece gave that wondering a home, a method, and a name. But the spirit of philosophy belongs to no place and no people. It belongs to the moment when a human being dares to ask for reasons and will not rest until they find them. If this reflection on ancient Greece, the pre-Socratic thinkers, the poleis, and the long journey from myth to reason speaks to you, subscribe for more explorations of the origins of human thought. Share it with someone who loves questions more than answers. And tell me, where do you think philosophy truly begins? In Greece, in older civilizations, or in the quiet moment when the human mind first says, I must understand?